Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on bringing innovation to life in your distributed team. Thank you so much for joining. I'm delighted to be joined by Zach, who I'm going to hand over to in a moment. But first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Innovation Beehive so that you know who we are and why we're talking to you. Zach, if you could pass on to the next slide. So first off to say, my name is Joe Nagel. I'm Innovation Director at the Innovation Beehive. So I work on a huge range and variety of projects with a wide range of clients, mainly talking about people-centered innovation. So thinking about how your organization is structured, what your culture looks like, how you recruit the best talent, how you deliver brilliant training to embed the right behaviors and skills into the organization. And we work with a huge range of clients, which are on the next slide, Zach. And really across sector, across industry, working with people at the front line, working with senior leaders. So we bring quite a wide range of experience of working with leadership teams. And of course, over the last 12 months, we've been working with those teams through one of the most challenging times that we've ever experienced. And a byproduct of that has been that we have moved our entire innovation offer online. So Zach Curtis, who I'm going to hand over to now, is going to talk about some of the principles that we have identified that enable amazing collaboration in a digital context to deliver cutting-edge innovation for your organizations. Zach, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. It's not just about that, because we also want to hear from you guys as well. Don't worry, you will be able to do whatever you're doing now. It's not going to be massively interactive, but we will need and love some of your support on the chat as time goes by. And do, of course, ask any questions using the chat if you would like. There's a couple of things we're going to cover. One is, what does innovation look like as we go through and then later beyond COVID? And also we'll look at what innovation means when we deliver it remotely as leaders. And actually, in this context, if you are listening to this and you don't have a huge team under you, or you're part of a team reporting to other people, you know what? These principles that we're going to be talking about are still valid, because we all in some way are responsible for leading innovation in our organizations, or even alone. So we'll look at the behaviors needed for leading innovation, and we'll also look at a methodology and tools for remote teams. First thing we should probably do is just reevaluate why innovation is important for us in our roles as we've gone through the pandemic. So if you just want to type into the chat why you think innovation is important for us. And while we're doing that, I don't want to, today is not really about sigmoid curves, and Joe's just put in type here in the chat there. I don't want to talk about sigmoid curves too much, but most of us are on some sort of S-curve, whether you consider it's Kubler-Ross or something else. We're all on different parts of an S-curve as we go through this pandemic. Sometimes, some days, some weeks maybe, we're up, and other days we're going down, and then sometimes we're up again. And it's exactly the same with our working practices, the way we approach work, the way that we approach innovation. We're all at slightly different parts of that wave of how we feel and how we interact with others. So a large part of today is talking about how we, leading in innovation, can make sure that we're aligned in some way, or at least have a shared understanding of how different people in our teams are going to be at different places in the way that they approach being innovative. So do keep those items coming through on the chat. Why is innovation important for me as a leader? We've got a couple of things coming in now. One, to keep employees engaged. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. The more creative we can be in the way that we engage our distributed teams, our remote employees, the better.
We've had another comment come in, Zach, which is around survival. So, actually over the last 12 months, I'm inferring, there's been significant challenges, and actually people have needed to innovate in order to even survive as an organization, whether that's innovating on new offers for customers or innovating on new ways of working for their employees and for their teams.
Yeah.
Good comment.
Yeah, totally agree with that. We've got another one: to ensure that our ways of working stay fresh. Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we've done, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really valuable because, again, links to engagement in some ways. If you don't have engaged employees who feel that they've got fresh ways of working, you're actually going to struggle to innovate, but you're also going to struggle to serve your customers. Here's another. We need a progressive journey to bring new ideas to our teams and customers. Can't always do what we've always done, process and product. I really like the point, Steve, there that you brought up about process as well as product. And also another angle on innovation is around thinking about innovation on experience. So thinking about things like the customer journey and the user experience, but also the touch points that you have with your customers. We've just done a fantastic project with a national energy provider, and that was all about innovating around customer touch points. So it's not just about new products or new apps. It's also about thinking about the process that you go through to build those, and it's also about thinking about the process and the experience that you give to your customers. All of that can be innovation. Another one from Craig: change is a constant, so it's best to lead it rather than be led by it, and innovation is a great way to achieve that. Brilliant. I think that I couldn't have put it better myself. When you think about disruptive innovation, or Clayton Christensen talked about how actually markets are constantly going to be disrupted. It's a process that happens in the economy. It's something that you can be a part of and intentionally lead for, but it's going to happen whether you do or not. So when people say, oh, we need a bit of disruption, I'm always a little cautious and say, well, you need to be leading disruption. You don't necessarily want to be disrupted. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Joe. So I just wanted to clarify 3 different things, because actually this whole webinar this morning is centered around 3 different principles. Because remember, the purpose of this webinar is all about how we can actually be innovative with distributed teams. When we have people working in multiple locations, perhaps in different countries or certainly in different areas, it can be difficult to make sure that we stay on track. So we need to do 3 separate things. The first thing, which we'll break down bit by bit, is setting expectations, making sure that the people we work with have really clear boundaries and expectations of what it is we're trying to achieve when we're being creative. The second part is providing them with the right tools. By having the right tools and the understanding of how to use them and what we expect from them, they're more likely to be as productive and innovative as possible. And the last thing is empowering them through structure. Now, this is one of the most interesting areas to get right, because a lot of people find, or a lot of leaders find that, okay, we'll give you the tools, we'll give you the training, and that's it, off you go, be creative, be innovative, solve our problems. But of course, it isn't quite as simple as that. We need to make sure that we continually empower them and send them the right messages so that they can be as creative as possible. So let's look first at the very first principle, that of setting expectations. Now, for this, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen. If you don't have that, just type directly into the chat box, but you may find it's easier with a piece of paper and a pen. Maybe do both. Let's use all our tools. Joe's got one there. And so you've got one instruction. Some of you may have seen me do this before, and I'm doing it again because I love it. I think it's great. All right, so this is the instruction. What is half of 13? Now, if you could just take a moment or two to write down your answer. What is half of 13? That would just be great. Joe, to me, it seems like it's quite straightforward. What is half of 13?
Yeah.
Does it seem straightforward to you? Don't give us your answer yet. We've got some coming in on the chat. Very good. So keep it coming through. Write it on the paper or type it in the chat. What is half of 13?
I've just realized I wrote down a quarter of 13, so I need to finish.
It's all about setting expectations on the question, Joe.
Yes.
All right, good. So most of you should have answered that by now, which is perfect. We do have plenty of answers coming in. Of course, a lot of the answers we've had coming in are this thing you can see on the screen here, 6.5, 6.5, because that logically is the most obvious answer. But we do have some coming in on the chat here, which are a little bit different, Joe.
Yeah, I can see we've got a third, which is possibly slightly more. Oh, yeah, okay. Craig has corrected himself. Yeah, so thir, we've got thir or teen.
Yep.
I've done one here, which is literally half of 13.
So you've split the word horizontally in half.
Exactly.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Very good. There's quite a few others, actually. We've run this exercise regularly over the years just because it just awakens us up a bit. So we've had answers like, of course, 6.5, which is the majority of answers for people who haven't seen this exercise before. But we've also had half a baker's dozen. Half of 13 is 50% of it. 13, as you saw with Joe there, split horizontally in half, We've had it vertically in half, as we've had on the chat here. We've had 1, we've had 3, we've had 1 and 3 split horizontally. We've had 7 rounded up. I hope there's no accountants listening to this. We've had half unlucky and half lucky and so on. And of course, the point is that if you give one instruction, innovate around this, we're all going to have slightly different ways or slightly different views on how we go about solving it due to the natural way that we think. And we could argue for hours offline. Do feel free to contact me about whether it's nature or nurture. And there's arguments for both. And there's arguments for cognitive preference and all that sort of thing. But really, for now, the only point we need to consider is we all have different ways of approaching. So we need to find some way to align everybody. We need to find some way to make sure that we set clear expectations for everybody because we are all different. So if you think about someone who approaches the world or approaches innovation or approaches problem solving or creativity differently from you, and actually do that now. Think of somebody in your life, could be a partner or a friend or a colleague that is different to you. So I'm going to do the same. I'm thinking of someone right now. And Joe, for your benefit, that person is someone called Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking of that person. They definitely are very different to me and they approach challenges differently from me. I hope you've got someone in your mind now, because once we do, firstly, know ourselves, we make sure that we understand how we like to approach innovation and solving challenges. We need to make sure that we can recognize how other people are different so that we can then begin to align ourselves and set clear expectations that we can work through. So let's just do a quick poll for fun, just to keep you engaged in a slightly different way. And if I'm going to put on your screen in just a second, something which may answer what you've been thinking, why they're different to you, why they try and solve problems differently from you. I'm going to put up a question, which is think of someone who is different. How might they approach innovation differently? And then the answers are, they are more logical than me. They're more organized than me. They might be better at engaging others than me. They might be more creative than me. They might be better at working with numbers than me. They might be better at looking at detail than me, or more empathetic, or more of an ideas person. Or it might be that it's something else that's different from you, in which case write it in the chat. But we'd love to know, of the one person that you were thinking of from the last slide, how do you feel that they are different from you?
And while people are responding to that, I'm just going to catch a comment that came in when we were thinking about why innovation is important. So innovation is innately human. So it's about being a human, leading humans. And I think that speaks into what we're talking about now. The point is, all humans are different. And we need to be mindful of that as we seek to lead our teams and our people.
Absolutely true, Joe. And that oddly is the learning outcome of this particular slide. So it's multiple choice, this poll as well. So do feel free to put in more options than just one. We'll just do it for another maybe 10 seconds or so. So Joe, while we're doing that 10 seconds, the person I'm thinking of, Sarah, she is very, very, very processed. So she writes lots of lists. She's very organized, very much looks at the detail of things, which I don't. And her view is that I am somehow better than me at innovation, better than her at innovation, better at being creative and so on, because I'm much more right brain dominant. I like coming up with ideas and being creative and all that sort of stuff. But actually, of course, it's not the case. We need her to work through innovation as well, because she'll catch the things which aren't my natural strength. So it's really important that we do recognize other people's strong points. Absolutely. So, okay, let me just end this poll now and we'll just share some of the outputs here.
One of the things I love about asking this particular question on these webinars, of course, is by asking, think of someone different to you, how might they approach innovation differently? It gives us a really good sense of who's decided to join the webinar as well. Because if you look at what the opposite of the things that are selected is, then that's who's on the call.
Yeah, and so in theory, as you can see on the screen there, we've shared the poll results. We've got, actually, we do have a mix. We have a real mix. So we, as you probably know, lovely listeners, we've created an innovation based psychometric tool which looks at different people's cognitive preferences and so on. So we've got a real range here. We've got people who think more logically than them. We've got people that perhaps feel that the other person is more creative. We've got people that feel that they're better at looking at numbers and return on investment and so on. So we do have a bit of a broad stretch, but the key point is every single person, regardless of their cognitive preference or the way they approach innovation, has something to bring to innovation, something to bring which we perhaps don't. So if we can find some way to leverage them to use their strengths, then our innovations are going to be stronger within the team. To make that as great and as useful as possible, we still need to give clear boundaries. We still need to give some sort of clear indication of what it is we're trying to do. I've closed the poll. If that somehow hasn't cleared from your screens, do just delete it off. And there are a couple of key behaviors that we need to align on when we're setting expectations. And one is that the innovation process is both expansive and reductive. There are moments when we need to be as expansive, meaning broad thinking, as possible. And if we look at a process, for example, like design thinking, which we'll cover over later on, the beginning of it is all about understanding the landscape that your problem sits in, the challenge you're trying to solve. And so we need that to be expansive. We need to gather as much information as possible so that we have the clear and full landscape in front of us. However, in order for us to come up with great ideas, we need to then be reductive. That means then that we need to try and focus on what really the true problem is. But then again, when we're coming up with ideas, presumably you would think, and it's true, that the correct behavior is expansive. That means you have to come up with a lot of ideas, not just the first one that comes into your mind, even though you may logically feel that it's the best one. Now, to do that, we need to make sure that we signal the correct behavior to the rest of the team. So educate them on the behaviors, expansive and reductive, for example, and then signal to them which behavior you're expecting at that moment. That way, everyone has a framework to work in terms of their behavior so that they can all align together with an understanding of how each other works based on the previous slide. There's two other key behaviors as well that you can see at the bottom of the visual here, rain and sun. Now imagine, Joe, that I was walking down the street and I presented you with two seeds, two identical seeds. They looked and felt, and the size was absolutely identical to each other, but one was a weed and the other was a flower. Now, how would you know which one to kill off without planting in your garden as a weed and which one to grow and nurture into a beautiful flower? Well, of course, the answer is that you'd have to plant them both, love them, nurture them, grow them, talk to them if you're Prince Charles, and just make them come out of their shell a bit and grow to such a height that you can recognize that one is a weed and one is a beautiful flower. Now that's called sun behavior. You grow both the seeds, regardless of whether or not you think one is good and one is bad. It's exactly the same with ideas. You grow all ideas until you later discover that one isn't quite as useful as the other. And the reason for that is with sun behavior, by suspending your judgment, seeking to understand what the other person that you're ideating with is trying to say, and then nurturing their idea, another great idea may fall out of it, or it may cluster into something else. Reductive behavior is where at one moment you kind of rain behavior is where you one moment close them down, you react and assume and insist that your way of doing it is the right way. And you see that, of course, in social media all the time. There are moments in innovation when that is important, when you're trying to use reductive thinking, but you've got to signal to your team the right moment to use those exact behaviors. Now, when you're starting some sort of innovation project, or you're trying to get your team aligned in a way of thinking around innovation, you could just use a simple contracting tool like the one you see on the screen here. Feel free to take a photograph of it, where you just put together several simple boxes. Firstly, you align on what our goals are as a team. You look at how you need to work together to achieve those goals. You might look at your commitment as a team leader. You might look at what could stop us working, some barriers. You might look at our commitments as a team and so on. And then you might start to, on a Zoom call together, populate them with whatever is relevant linked to the idea that you're facing. And by populating them together, you'll get the team buy-in, and by sharing it afterwards, you'll at least have a working document of how you will be in the expectations that you set while you're ideating. Now, that clarity of expectation is unbelievably important once it comes on to you guys sharing the way that you're going to work and sharing clear goals, which is the second principle. Sorry, clear tools, which is the second principle. And before we get, Joe's put some clarity there.
Before you move on to the second principle, I just wanted to just highlight one thing regarding the expansive versus reductive behaviors. So recognizing that we need both in the creative process. I think when you think about the diversity of the team and the diversity of people we know in our network, I think one of the key learnings that I take from that is the principle of many minds. So actually, the more people we have working on our innovation projects, so we can bring in the whole team into the creative process, because actually at different stages during that process, they will shine. So, you know, if you're the highly logical person, there's opportunities for you to really add value. If you're an expansive thinking person, there's opportunities for you to add value. The key principle is that people need to know when they need to express themselves as themselves, and when they need to adapt to other steps in the process.
Thank you, Joe. Very good. So you can see different ways of innovating and thought processes working together in harmony just here. All right, so in the second principle, it's all about providing the right tools. Now that means a couple of things. The right tools is really broad. We'll look at some collaboration tools shortly, or suggest some collaboration tools shortly, but it'll also allow you to suggest yours. But firstly, it's very much about making sure that you, if you do have a distributed team working remotely, that you encourage that team to work as comfortably and effectively as they can if they're working from home, for example, in their home environment. And it's different for different people because we're all on a different part of that S curve, and we all have slightly different home and working circumstances. So our ability to be flexible is useful. But if we as leaders can support people to work from home effectively, they will innovate more effectively as well. So that could be 5 different areas. So for example, educating each other on how we can most effectively handle time. So we found that it's really useful to plan tomorrow tonight. So plan your day the night before and have really clear time boundaries with other people that you might share the house with. So carve out some time just for you, which I appreciate can sometimes be difficult. But also there's some validity in routine, and actually making sure that you diarize and list as many positive and build into habits as many positive habits as you possibly can, and then just throw out any habits that aren't working for you. And that should be a continual process. So as you go through creating habits and discarding habits, make sure that you assess and test and then reiterate, just like an innovation process with your habits. And I use a particular, I'm not advocated by them or anything, but I use a particular tool which is called Done, which is about helping you to grow habits. So it's on the App Store of various different phones, and it's just about helping you to embed habits and do them repeatedly and so on. And I found that really, really useful. But also for our teams, it's great if we can set a clear intention. So setting super clear goals, or getting them to set super clear goals for what they should achieve the day afterwards, on the night before. It helps them to prioritize their workload so they actually have time for innovation. One of the biggest challenges with getting a distributed team to innovate is in getting the time for them to do it. So all of this stuff helps to release the time for them to be collaborative and effective together. The next part is environment. So for a lot of people, well, for years, I was training people to have a clear health and safety setup desk with the right chair, the right height desk, and the right environment in a dedicated room in the house to work. And a lot of people love working that way, but it doesn't work for some, and it doesn't work for me, I have to admit. You know, I spent 10 years on the road working from hotel rooms, and now I can't focus that long if I'm stuck in one room. I come into the room you see here for webinars, but apart from that, I'm working all over the place. I work around the house, in the kitchen, in the sitting room, in the garden, in the car sometimes, just because that helps my brain to keep active. So by giving permission to our team to do that, it really becomes powerful. Now, the last thing there is tools, providing as many collaborative tools as you can. This is going to be a bit of a share, so do feel free over the next 3 visuals, which is communication tools, collaboration tools, and innovation tools, to share what you found works for you. And we're going to suggest some of our own as well. So do feel free to take a photo of the screen or to note stuff down, because you'll see, firstly, in communication tools, we've got some obvious ones. So many companies, of course, use Slack and use different Slack channels to help communicate across organizations. But I've seen more and more companies now using Slack to integrate with innovation tools, which has been quite fascinating to watch. And then they try to come up with great ideas in different Slack channels, leveraging that many minds principle that Joe mentioned earlier. WhatsApp as a tool has been started to be used in innovation more and more. The challenge with it is that it's not, it's because it's linear in the way that you see the messages, it's not super useful in terms of collaboration, but in terms of communication, it's not too bad. And then, of course, you just have any video conferencing software that you might use in your organization, such as Teams or Zoom and so on. And we in our organization for innovation use both Zoom and Teams and find them great with their breakout rooms, and Teams has a new breakout room functionality as well. But there are loads of others. So there's software like Mighty Networks, of course, email, phone, SMS, and so on, but also your intranet. We know that a lot of organizations use the intranet as a way of capturing ideas from their employees and setting ideas, challenges, and hunts, etc. We also know that people still use Yammer and FaceTime. But what communication tools do you use and find useful? So we've had a few things coming in, Joe.
Yeah, I think probably Mural will be more appropriate for the next slide, actually, Zach, around the collaboration tools. And I think you've possibly covered the vast majority of communication tools that people might be using, actually. There's going to be others. I mean, I sometimes communicate with clients on LinkedIn as well. So, you know, if I haven't got their mobile number and they haven't replied to an email, well, I'll send them a quick message on LinkedIn saying, hey, get back to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got something coming through on the chat. I should have really pointed this one out myself, being a traditional face-to-face person, but I've adapted to online workshops. Of course, we as a company, we hold workshops nearly every day on innovation. And of course, it's a great way of communicating, but it takes a lot of that principle one, setting expectations in the right way to hold the workshops and what people should bring to their workshops and how they should work through the workshops. So I love that suggestion. Thank you very much. Value stream mapping. I don't know, but I'm going to write down and look it up.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And again, do feel free to, in the coming slides, to just photograph the screens if there's any tools you feel you want to look into. We don't work for any of these companies. Well, we're not sponsored by any of these companies in order to sell them, but they're just interesting software to us.
Yeah.
Kanban, yeah, of course, Kanban, very good, especially for Kanban works quite well for collaboration as well. So let's just have a look at that. So in terms of collaboration, I mean, some of the bigger ones are, of course, Miro. We use, and Joe, what was the one you mentioned just now? Mural.
So Mural, yeah, and I think Craig's comment about value stream mapping workshops and Kanban was to do with Mural. So yeah, Mural looks a little bit like Miro. I've just Googled it now. Haven't used it, but Craig has used it. And I should say, like most of the things we're recommending, either we've used ourselves or we know people who've used them. And I think it's a case of finding what works for you. Yeah, looking at Mural, it looks great. It looks very much like Miro, and yeah. I'm not going to recommend it because I haven't used it, but Craig, you recommend it, so good, thank you.
Yeah.
And one of the advantages of software like Mural and Miro is that it allows real-time collaboration. So you know you can be on a workshop and share your screen, but also you can give people access to the white. It's like a whiteboard effectively. So if you imagine you've taken a room in which you would hold a workshop. And you know, you'd use the walls for post-it notes, you'd have flip charts, you'd have the floor space. Well, it takes those dynamics of engaging together and applies them in a digital two-dimensional space. They're brilliant bits of software, and they've transformed the way we work with our clients away from just sharing PowerPoint slides and trying to then use templates and take notes. You know, we can do it all collaboratively together. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, with yes, with them actually operating the Miro board.
Absolutely, yeah.
In some cases.
Exactly.
So it definitely makes a difference. I put there Asana as well as a collaboration tool. A lot of people really use it as a kind of project management tool, but what it does do is allow people to put data or tasks or whatever is relevant into an innovation project, which again helps to set those expectations at the start and help people to understand where everyone else is in the innovation project. So we find that quite useful. But one of the most underrated tools, and I have to admit, I still don't use it to its maximum capability, is Office 365. Now, some people love it, some people hate it, but what I love about it is the ability of all the separate softwares within the suite to talk to each other in a way that certainly works for me with all the different things that I use in it. So that could be anything.
Actually, there's Office 365. There's also the Google G Suite, which equally, you know, has got a lot of capability, and these big companies are adding to their capability every day. I've discovered recently that Microsoft Teams has now got breakout rooms, which was definitely lacking before. If you do use Office 365 and you do use Teams and you haven't discovered the breakout room functionality there, it's a game changer for team meetings and workshops. Absolutely is.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Now I've noticed I'm having a letters issue on the bottom right there, but essentially the collaboration startup software market is now worth billions. And there is just a few that I haven't used, but a quick Google came up with them. So it's Hive, Flock, Pastel, Fleep, Gain, Teamwork, Team Gantt, Nutcash, Riva, Blink, and Monday.com. Now, Monday.com, of course, has had a massive marketing drive recently and seems to be going places. But do feel free to just look into them and find what, as Joe said, whatever works for you. Now, more interestingly and more linked to specifically innovation, there's a few key tools that we love. The first, and again, do keep typing into the chat things that you use for innovation or for collaboration. So there's a couple of really, really lovely ones that have come up. Let's start with the most obvious and basic, and that's SurveyMonkey. So if we're ever looking to test and validate any great innovation, SurveyMonkey is regularly used for testing prototypes and getting feedback on prototypes. And they have quite a lot of functionality to help do that. And there's a few you may not know about that I'd love to just introduce. I've used a few of them with some success. One big one is Envision. So Envision is a collaborative prototyping whiteboard. It's used by Amazon, it's used by IBM, and it's about creating interactive digital prototypes. So that's a great way that you can get people together to work on a digital prototype and then test it without being face to face with them, because they can comment on the prototypes and build them up together, which is great. Another one which is useful, you know, we're not necessarily digital innovators ourselves. We're here to help humans become more innovative. But I found bubble.io is really, really useful because you don't need any knowledge of code, and you can build up web apps really, really simply just by using their kind of blocks that they put together already. So that's great. Sketch is another way to build out digital prototypes. They work with Porsche and Xbox and Facebook and so on. Similar thing, just working with different wireframes. Figma is one I haven't used, but I would love to use, and I might look into that shortly. It allows teams to collaboratively design, allows them to create and test things together using wireframes, working with Twitter and Zoom and Dropbox and various others. So definitely some to look into. That is Envision, Bubble.io, Sketch, and Figma. And I'm sure there's loads more out there. So are there any more that you use? We've had a comment come in. Prezi is a great alternative for presentations. Yeah, so I love Prezi. Now, I was using Prezi back in the early days. I can't even remember how long, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe, when it first came out. And it was amazing the way it zoomed across to different things and zoomed in on different things. I loved it. And I have to say, I haven't looked at it in the last few years, but I must do again. It has similar functionality to the zooming you can do on Miro with frames. But I must indeed look into it again. If you do have something in mind that you've used which is interesting, do let us know. All right, good. So
wait. One more thing to add to that. If you can pop back to the last slide.
Yeah.
So one of the principles around innovation, and one of the challenges that a lot of people have talked to us about over the last year, is around kind of prototyping your concept, prototyping your idea. Now, if you work in digital innovation, then you're going to be familiar with how to do that anyway. There's a creative leap that we need to make if we're testing things like service innovation or experience innovation or product innovation that isn't a digital product in a digital context. And one of the little tricks that I've learned over the years is you can test the principle without testing the functionality. So you can test the user need, the want, or the desire without necessarily building the whole thing. And just really easily, one of the most effective ways of doing that is getting yourself an account with one of the, like Wix or similar sort of web developer companies that again have those sort of modular websites, and you just work out what the principles of your website are, and then build something that is sort of offering the product. And then at the bottom it just says, get in touch or get added to our waiting list to learn more. You haven't got the product behind it, but you're gonna build up a mailing list for the new product that you're designing. So that's a definite win. But also the number of people who visit the site versus the number of people who sign up will actually be a good way of testing how much interest there is in the product that you're offering and the principles of the product that you're offering. And if you generate sufficient interest, then you know that you've got a good business case to go ahead with it. So you don't even need a survey for that. You just need a sign up form. And there's a win-win because you build a mailing list as well.
Sold.
Definitely.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Right. So there is an even more last bit of this particular session, and that is, of course, regardless of what collaboration or communication or innovation software that you use to help you be more creative as a team, you need to make sure that you give clear expectations of how those tools are to be used. That might mean doing some training on them or getting some training in to work on those, but also giving clear expectations of how those tools are to be used to help your team be as creative and innovative as possible. As long as you have all that in place, don't just throw tools at them and hope they'll get it. We need to make sure that we put it within a clear plan of execution. There's one last important principle, an extremely important principle to talk about, and that is empowering the team through structure. Now, what that really means is giving our teams permission to innovate. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that one of the biggest challenges that we've faced over the years is people saying, I can't innovate because I don't have the time. When I was 11 years old, I created a saying, which I felt was amazing because I was 11. And that is, there's always enough time. There's just never enough effort to find it. But what it really comes down to is actually about priorities. If we can prioritize for our teams the ability or give them the permission to innovate, then they're more likely to want to do it. Whereas if they feel that it's not part of their key role or deliverables, they're going to focus on what is the core part of their job, linked to their KPIs and so on. So we need to make sure that we do give clarity, firstly, on what innovation means for the team, why innovation is important for them, and exactly on what should they be innovating. It's back to that setting expectations principle at the beginning, by making sure that we can give them permission in the right direction on either, I don't know, business process, or if it's product innovation, a particular product, or perhaps a customer experience, or even their own experience, the way that they work internally. How can we make sure that they are creative about the way that they work remotely in a distributed team? By setting those expectations and by giving them permission to operate in that space, they are very likely to then do it more effectively. But it's not just about giving permission. We need to make sure that we give them a methodology for problem solving. So Google has their 9 notions of creativity, and number 7 is that creativity loves constraint. And what that really means is that people are more likely to be creative if they have a framework in which to be creative. By giving people barriers in some way, or boundaries, they have an idea of how far or not they should go. And we found that to be very powerful in all of the work that we do, by making sure that people understand where they are, where they can go, and where everything sits around them. They're more likely to have that creative spark. So the methodology that we're promoting today, of course, is the one that we love. Joe, do you want to do this, or shall I do it?
I can do this. So yeah, this is what I do for my day job. So this is the design thinking process. It's also sometimes known as human-centered design. And that's really why Zach says we love this, because innovation in organizations and in people's minds and creativity, often people dive straight to ideas. And the problem with diving straight to ideas is you're often then led by the features of the product, the service, the business process that you've come up with, rather than being led by the need, the want, or desire of your end user, whether that's an employee, whether it's a customer, whether it's a stakeholder. So the first stage of design thinking is to discover more about the end users of the particular innovation that you're thinking of coming up with. So you uncover insights, you talk to them, be alongside them through ethnographic research, surveys, questionnaires, testing people's appetite for different features and benefits, a whole range of ways of gathering insight. You can also do market research, industry research, etc. The more information that you have, the better, because the next stage, which is defining your challenge, identifying the key themes of the problem that you're trying to solve, is when you take all of these data points and you cluster them, you turn them into challenge questions, what we call how might we questions. And only at that point do you then start to come up with ideas. And I can't stress enough, all of this can be done in a digital context. And in some ways, all of this is much easier in a digital context because that's where information is. So when you've got your how might we questions, then you start to generate ideas. And the how might we questions are broad enough that they're not identifying a solution implicitly, but they're specific enough that you're not having crazy ideas about things that aren't actually related to your customers' needs, wants, and desires. So you come up with loads of ideas. And once you've identified which ideas you think are the most sticky, the most likely to generate positive results for the end user, you then create a prototype. We talked a little bit about the sorts of prototypes you could create, and then you test them, and you find ways of testing them with the end users, not just with other people in your team, unless your team happens to be your end user. So it's really important to test the ideas with the people who are then going to be the customer or the user of the product, innovation, experience that you're creating. And then once you've tested them, you then go back and iterate if you need to. You develop the idea further based on the results of the test. But ultimately, you're working towards scaling up the innovation for launch. And scaling up might mean you're setting up a new business. It might mean you've come up with a new process for 5 people in your team. It might mean that you've come up with something you're going to do for yourself. But the key thing is you scale from a nascent idea to actually rolling out what you have come up with. And that is when you have your innovation, because innovation is about generating value from creativity, not just about creativity in and of itself.
Joe, that was beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks for letting me throw you under the bus there.
No worries.
It's just you do it so well. I love it. Let's dig into we've got a few minutes left. Let's dig into a brief bit of more detail on each of those steps and what it means for your distributed team. So firstly, let's just look at why insights are important. I don't know how many of you listening to this have kids, but can you imagine it's dark, you get out of bed, you walk across the bedroom onto the landing, and suddenly you are in the most excruciating pain because you've stepped on Lego. There were some Lego bricks dotted around the house and it was dark. You didn't really see them. You didn't remember they were there from the night before. Has anyone done that? Have you stepped on Lego before? It's unbelievably uncomfortable. I can imagine a few of you are nodding. Gathering insights is really all about understanding the landscape that our challenge sits in. And by understanding that landscape, we're more likely to be able to navigate the right way around those Lego bricks to ensure that we get the result that we really need. And it's not just about seeing the wood for the trees. It's about seeing the whole forest so that we can really begin to understand what direction we should go in. Without seeing the whole forest, we may go in the wrong direction to achieve the goal. So it's about that breadth. How do we get the breadth? Well, there's a few obvious ways. We could get data from different sources. We could get broader market data, or we could interview end users, customers, and people within the logistics chain of the area we're trying to innovate in. Essentially, though, we're looking for 4 principal questions to be answered. We need as much information as possible on the what. That could be facts, numbers, figures, detail, projected return on investment, and so on. We need information on the how. That could be how the process or the product has operated in the past. And how have people been impacted? We need information on the who. That could be not the Who, the band. We need information on the who. That could be the people involved and what has been their experience. We need information on the why. That could be why has it not been solved before, or what has been some great options that have been tried and failed previously, and why are we even trying to solve it in the first place? If we look at, for example, getting data, and we're talking here about quantitative, that might answer some of the what and the how, possibly. But really, to get the why and the who, we definitely need to get insights from humans, people who are experienced with interacting with the product or process or whatever it is that we're innovating around in a detailed way, by making sure that we ask them things in the best possible way. Now, just to give you a heads up, we do have a design thinking online course, which will reduce by 50%, 49 quid, which is nothing for an innovation course, just because we love you all. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be a cam scanner thing, a QR code. You just hold over it, and a code to remember and write down, and it'll take you there. Type in the code and you've got this course with something like 13 hours of video or whatever it is. might be 6 hours of video, but 13 tools, that was it. 13 tools that you can download and use to help you be more creative through the design thinking process. So firstly, gathering insight, super important, but the next step is then being reductive, as we talked about the behaviors before. Now, if you look at this person, it might be that they're not doing what we think they're doing. Joe has put the link to the course in the chat. Joe, what do you think this person might be doing? What does this person need?
I don't know, Zach. Why don't we throw that out to everyone? So type into the chat, folks. What do you think this person might need? What do you think this person is trying to achieve? This is a really important question to ask when we're observing and when we're engaging with our customers and end users. If we take things as we see them, then we see one thing. So what do you think we're seeing right now?
Okay, we've got things coming in.
Yeah, easy access to a book / information, reaching beyond physical limits. Yeah, great.
A ladder.
A ladder, yes. A ladder, someone taller to help, the bookcase to be reordered. Absolutely, yep. Absolutely.
The internet.
Yeah, great. Better shoes for climbing.
Yeah.
Excellent. What else do you think
arms
might need, Zach? I know you've seen some rather interesting responses to this in the past. An alternative way to research has just come in. Stepping machine.
Stepping machine, yeah. Yeah, we've had people saying they need a mouse trap because they feel they're running away from a mouse. And need to reorganize a bit. Health and safety training. Yep. But of course, the point is that when we're being reductive, we need to make sure we can't be reductive unless we fully understand as much of the insights in an expansive way as possible, which means then we can start to narrow down exactly what it is. By narrowing down to what they're really after, which right now we don't know, it could be any one of those things, which we've gathered through the insights. By narrowing down, that means then that we have a clear and valid, Joe mentioned how might we question, point from which we can springboard into ideating. So in the define mode, which is when we're being reductive, that's where we gather all of our insights, all the possible reasons that that person was stepping up in the way that they were. And then we draw out of them themes, and we flip those themes into what are called, as Joe mentioned, how might we questions. And we started with those 3 words because the how allows us to start solutionizing with our mind. The might means we're open to possibility, and the we, of course, is bringing everybody together. And then we use that question that we've created in order to springboard into ideas. Oh, now we can relax. Ideas. Finally, in innovation, we're coming up with ideas. Well, that's good. That's easy. We've all sat physically in meetings, and I'm sure we've all sat in virtual meetings where we've been brainstorming and coming up with good ideas. The challenge with brainstorms is, particularly, do you remember in the old days when we would meet in a meeting room, we would start to populate the walls with some of these things, with some of these different post-it notes. We'd write stuff on the post-it notes, wonderful notes. We keep writing them and keep typing them and coming up with lots of great things. And what would happen? Not much. We'd populate the walls and then we'd come back to them several months or weeks later and not remember what any of them meant. Not really remember it at all. And that's because there is a big difference between a thought and an idea. And what we were perhaps collecting on the post-it notes was a thought. Now, a thought is something intangible. It's something light. It's something which could be the kernel of an idea, but probably isn't right now. An idea is something that I could have written down on a piece of paper or on a virtual whiteboard and give to Joe, and he would be able to read it and have a really great understanding of what that thing is and be able to say, yeah, I can see this happening. I can see how it adds value to the problem you're trying to solve. Whereas the thought is nowhere near quite as strong as that. So when we're working with our distributed teams, it's really important that we work with them hard and signal to them by setting their expectations, by giving them permission to go into depth, to build out the what, the how, the who, and the why of an idea as well, so that it has a kind of life of its own. That's really what an idea is. We've had a comment here, Joe, on brainstorming. It's best to set the challenge and problem first, have everyone do their individual brainstorming first, then come together to review the ideas and do the 3 C's. Yeah, so there's a range of different, thank you very much for that comment. There's a range of different ideating ideas. And there are some great ones where essentially individuals have a kind of idea vomit almost. They empty themselves of ideas and then share together, and then they can use either a matrix or different types of democratic tools to then build on those ideas, like brainwriting styles, or to cut them or combine them, as you said. So yeah, there's plenty. That was a great suggestion. There's plenty of really good ideas, tools.
And actually, these work just as well virtually as they do in person. So again, it's just about finding the right technology to facilitate and enable the methodology that you want to use. And the key principle that we operate by when we're running innovation sessions is taking one idea at a time. Finish it before you move on to the next one. And if anyone comes up with another idea, that's great. And what we do is we park it on another post-it note on the Miro board and then come back to it next. And that way we are finishing an idea so that it's something that could be actionable, could be tested, could be taken away and have something done with it before we move on to the next one. And that way everyone feels heard and everyone feels they can contribute. So yeah, find the right platform to deliver the kind of innovation ideation workshop that you want to deliver.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Very good. Now, we've had our ideas, we've narrowed them down, we've worked out what idea is good for us. But then what? We need to bring it to life in some way, find some way of leveraging and showing the value in that idea as we build it out into a prototype to then later go on and test it. Now, there's a whole range of different ways that we can prototype, but I'd love to know in the chat what you feel would work in a virtual world, in a distributed team. So how can we together as a distributed team build a prototype? Which of these methods, or another one if you have an idea, would work for you? So there's video. That is often a great way of demonstrating the value of an idea through a prototype. Cardboard modeling, storyboarding, Lego prototyping, role playing, CAD modeling, diagrams, BMC, the business model canvas, developed by Alex Osterwalder, concept proforma, presentation software, and animation.
Yeah,
So
and actually, in a digital context, I think there are interesting ways of combining those. So, you know, one thing that I've seen some clients do is create stop motion animation using Lego to create the experience and to visualize the experience that they're looking to create. And also, again, role playing. Well, film your role play, and then you've made a video. And we've had storyboard come through here, storyboard or animation, so you can combine storyboarding and animation. And again, with storyboarding, you can do it as a sort of a graphic novel type thing, or you can do it as Steve has suggested as an animation. There's some prototyping on here, which of course is digital in the first place, like CAD modeling and presentation software, etc. But actually, what if you were to do some cardboard modeling and then translate it into a CAD model? So you're actually taking two steps, but learning as you go. Because we don't want to completely lose the physicality of prototyping. There is something about holding something in your hand and experiencing it that is really valuable. And you know, I've just had another idea actually, Zach, that you could do a make your own. So you actually have a how-to guide that people actually make their own prototype, put it to the test, and then let you know the responses. So you're actually translating the physical experience through a digital means to put into someone else's hands the prototype that you want to create. And I suppose we should add 3D printing to this going forward as well.
Thanks. We probably should now. And there are some of those which of course you can leverage some of the collaboration software that we saw earlier to do, like Business Model Canvas. You can get a template on Miro, and then together everybody starts to populate it and discuss it. So very good. Now there's a couple of things we need to remember when we're working with our distributed team. Everyone needs to be clear on, once they've been given permission to innovate, they need to be clear on really understanding how they can bring to life building a concept, as Joe was talking about just there. But also we need to work together to understand the stakeholder map. Who are we going to engage with? Who could be useful to us when we're starting to build up that prototype and then later go on and test it? And then the prototyping itself, as Joe explained previously. The most important part, though, is working with your distributed team to ensure that you all understand the call to action. Now, what we mean by that is, can it answer these different things? And again, it's linked to the what, the how, the who, and the why. You know, can you articulate the landscape that you were facing before, the facts and the figures that the challenge sat in, but then also in the future, how will you measure the output? What's the return on investment? Or it could be, can you demonstrate in your prototype? What is the plan to move from prototype to test and then reiterate it and then move to launch with plenty of detail? you know, if you ever watch, what's that program, Dragon's Den, one of the areas that they always fall down on is on not knowing their numbers in that top left-hand area there, and also not knowing or having an idea of what is the plan. Oh, hello. What is the plan to bring it to life? But it's more than that, of course. It's about demonstrating the value. You know, how are you going to engage all of the stakeholders that you need to either bring it to life or to seek investments, depending on what the innovation is. But also, how can you demonstrate how you've actually solved the problem? It's not just a case of showing the prototype. How can you go beyond that to demonstrate that it does solve the problem better than anything has done before? Now, when we're talking about our distributed teams, we've talked through a number of different areas there in 3 principles. The best way of viewing it is just as, have I done my best to engage my teams in terms of setting expectations on what it is they can and can't do and what we're trying to achieve? Have I been able to provide them with the right tools to do the job in the right way, with the right training, and given the right permission in empowering through structure? And then given them a methodology to work through during that empowerment. If we can say yes to that, with whatever tools work for you, whatever methodologies work for you, and do feel free to share some more by email if you find some, we're always willing to learn more, then you can say that you have a good foundation for innovating with remote teams. If you would like a methodology with 13 downloadable tools that you can use on Miro or Mural or whatever interactive platform you like, do feel free to take this creative problem solving course. You just hold your phone over the QR code. It'll take you through to our learning management platform. In that, I'm afraid you get to see more of us working through the 5 stages of design thinking. And Joe explained all about that earlier, but it's a great little tool that you can share with your team to help them become more innovative, more effective. And as Google said, creativity loves constraints. So it's a really, really great tool with lots of downloadables as well. And it's a video-led program. And £49? God, that's cheap. What price is innovation in your organization? Just £49. So that is it. The code there is leaders oct 50. So we're going to keep this valid until October this year for the code. So do feel free to do that. And you can message us through the platform as well. But if not, thank you very much for your time. Joe, any closing remarks?
Just to say thank you to you, Zach. So and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks for being so engaging in the chat. Great to see you. And if you can move to the final slide, Zach, just so people have got our contact details. Whoa.
I forgot about the video.
Yeah, so look out for an email from me in the next day or so with a recording, and also with a couple of the templates that you've seen on here. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing you on the Creative Problem Solving course and seeing you on future webinars. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Take care.
And good luck working in remote teams.